Currently, the way we can pass all these different parameters to our hook is starting to get kind of hard to read. It's a long list of parameters, and it's easy to get confused on which one is which. Some users may even wonder if there's a specific reasoning behind their order. We also know throughout our implementation we probably could have made some of these parameters optional and provided sensible defaults for each of them. So let's create a type for these parameters, and then we'll be able to add default values for some of the optional ones. First, we'll create a folder under src called types. And I'm going to call this type usePleaseStayOptions. And so we'll export the type usePleaseStayOptions. And we know we have our titles, which is a string array. We have our animation type, which we can make optional, and its type is animation type. We have our favicon links, which is also optional, and a string array. We have our interval, which is also optional and is a number. And we have should always play, optional, and Boolean. Now this type will remove the suggestion that there's a sort of order to the parameters, which of course for our hook is not the case. And there's a few minor optimizations we can make to this type. We notice that titles is required, and there's a sort of loophole in the typings here in that I could pass an empty array and both TypeScript and JavaScript would still be happy with that. And as we know, in some of our useTitle change effect logics, if the array is empty, that will end up crashing our hook. So we're going to make a utility type to guard against that. Essentially, this utility type will require that the string array passed to titles has at least one item. So still in the types folder, I'm going to create a new type called array of one or more. And that's export type array of one or more. And this will accept a generic type. And we just want that first entry to be the generic type. And with that first entry being the generic type desired, we can union that with an array of that generic type. So back in usePleaseStayOptions, we can import that type. And we'll apply it here to the titles parameter. Instead of a string array, we will add array of one or more, and the generic type here is string. Now, the same is also true for the favicon links. Even though it's optional, if it is passed, we should also guard against the empty case. But we should also guard against a single value case. That is, if we look in our favicon change effect here, a favicon links array with just one entry wouldn't exactly break our app here. It just wouldn't do anything. And so I think it's a fair type guard to require that the user pass at least two favicon links. Otherwise, the toggle effect that they expect won't happen. So very similar to array of one or more, I'm going to copy this and create a type array of two or more. We can rename the type here and just add the second value to also be that generic type T. So in the usePleaseStayOptions, we will modify this to be the array of two or more and type string. And in usePleaseStay, we can import this type and apply it to our parameters here. So the first thing I'll do is strip off all the types. And I'm going to add a comma. And we're just going to wrap this whole thing in brackets. And we can type it according to usePleaseStayOptions. And as we said, the only required parameter here is titles. And with this type of notation, it's quite easy to provide default values for all the other optional parameters. So for animation type, I'll take animation type loop. And for the favicon links, this one will be undefined. For our interval, we'll take 500 milliseconds that we saw in some of the previous lessons. And we'll do should always play set to false. So this keeps the original functionality that we implemented, which is the animations will only run when focus is lost. So with these default values set, there's only one small change we need to make in our code, and that is to account for this undefined favicon links. So if we look in use favicon change effect, the first thing we'll do here is ensure that the type is that of the usePleaseStayOptions. So I'm going to import that type. And of course, we don't want the full type, but we just want the type of the favicon link key in that type. And so we know this now is either undefined when it's not passed at all, but if it is defined, it has at least 2 elements. And to guard against the case that favicon links is undefined, we're just going to wrap the whole useInterval function with if favicon links it's not equal undefined. Then we will run the increment logic here. And we also should add the same guard down in the useEffect, just to ensure that we're not going to access favicon links or try to access any index if it's undefined. And we should also add it to our dependency array. With the effort we've put into our custom type for the parameters, it's a good point in time that we document all of these parameters. And a good place to document this is in the README. And I'm not going to bore you with typing out the entire documentation. I'll just paste it in here. But essentially what it is a markdown table with the name, the type, the default value, and a small description of each of the parameters that we have in our usePleaseStayOptions. And I always find it nice in the GitHub README when people link directly to the source, and that's what we're using here. And in GitHub, you're allowed to link relatively to the README, and so the usePleaseStayOptions source file is, of course, the file we've just made in src types usePleaseStayOptions. We can actually leverage Visual Studio's code preview here to get a nice preview of how this looks. Kind of overflows the page, but you can get an idea of how this documentation table looks. So adding this new type as well as the nice documentation in the README just makes it that much easier for a developer unfamiliar with our hook to get up to speed on using it quite quickly. So now let's build the hook and make sure everything's still okay. And moving into the example app, we can open up the app.tsx. And we already noticed right away there's some errors, of course, because the signature of the hook has totally changed. And the first thing I want to illustrate is our one or more type that we've set on the titles. So, of course, we pass an object now, since our type is an object. And if we go to set titles, we can't just pass an empty array. That was the whole point of the utility type that we made. And so we see, of course, type empty array is unassignable to type array of one or more string. Property 0 is missing in type empty array but required. So of course it's telling us as soon as we have something like, or even just an empty string, it's satisfied. And the same is true for the favicon links. If I try and pass an empty array, it's of course going to yell at me. And instead of just a single value, I'm going to need to provide 2 values. So as soon as I provide 2 strings, then it's satisfied. The type is satisfied. So let's just take out these favicon links And we'll do a quick check to see if our default values are also working throughout the hook. So I'm only going to set 2 titles, hello world, and let's run the app and see if everything is still working as expected. And we've already got a good sign. We see our hello title. And of course, if I lose focus here, we get the toggling at approximately 500 milliseconds between the 2 titles. We don't get a favicon title, of course, because the default value is undefined. So we don't expect any favicon swapping. And we do just get this looping effect, as that also is the default value. So in summary, we created a new type, usePleaseStayOptions, to type the parameters of our hook. We added in 2 new utility types, namely array of 1 or more and array of 2 or more, which help guard against either an empty titles array or a favicon links array, which has less than 2 elements. In the actual usePleaseStay implementation, we added some sensible default values. And finally, we documented all the parameters in this new type in the README, including their names, their types, and their default value, as well as a small description. In the next lesson, we'll prepare a development-only warning logger to help warn developers if they pass potentially invalid parameters to the hook or other issues that they may encounter.